talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
The episode begins with Lars Harry speaking directly to his audience, explaining that this is a special bonus discussion from the Coravanta podcast. Instead of recording in his usual professional studio environment, he tells listeners he is working from a mobile setup while traveling, which gives the conversation a slightly more informal atmosphere. Still, despite the casual setting, the topic he is about to explore is anything but casual. Lars Harry explains that the story surrounding Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively has continued evolving in ways that many people did not expect when the controversy first began, and now a new development has appeared in the form of another article published by the New York Times. On the surface, Lars Harry says, the article appears to be credible journalism. It is written in the style of a serious investigative piece and presents itself as a careful examination of a complicated legal dispute. But according to Lars Harry, the context surrounding the article makes it impossible to view it without skepticism, because the same newspaper was responsible for publishing the original story that ignited the entire public conflict in the first place. That original piece framed Blake Lively as a distressed figure who had been mistreated on a movie set, and it created a narrative that spread rapidly across social media, entertainment news outlets, and public discussion forums. For weeks after the first article appeared, Lars Harry explains, that version of events dominated the conversation. Baldoni was widely portrayed as the antagonist in the situation, while Lively was presented as someone who had bravely spoken out about inappropriate behavior. However, as time passed, Baldoni began releasing information of his own. Documents, footage, and statements gradually emerged that complicated the narrative the public had been given. Instead of the story remaining simple, it became layered and contested, with each side presenting evidence meant to support their claims. Lars Harry argues that this is precisely where the role of journalism becomes crucial. When a newspaper publishes allegations that can dramatically affect someone's reputation and career, the responsibility to present information fairly becomes extremely important. Yet in Lashari's view, the New York Times article does not appear to approach the situation with that level of balance. Instead, he believes the piece doubles down on the original narrative rather than acknowledging the large amount of information that has surfaced since the first story was printed. To illustrate his point, Lars Harry begins reading comments and analysis that have circulated online in response to the new article. One particularly detailed critique summarizes the frustration many readers feel. According to this commentary, the article fails to address numerous incidents that were initially presented as evidence against Baldoni but later disappeared or changed as new details emerged. For example, Lars Harry mentions allegations connected to a dance scene from the film It Ends With Us, which had originally been described in dramatic terms by Lively supporters. Early reports suggested that Baldoni behaved inappropriately during the scene, supposedly making unscripted advances toward Lively. However, later information revealed that audio recordings existed from the set, and those recordings painted a more complicated picture of what actually happened. Lars Harry emphasizes that once Lively and her team realized audio existed, aspects of the accusation reportedly changed. Yet the new article does not fully explore that shift, which critics argue leaves readers with an incomplete understanding of the situation. Another point Lars Harry highlights involves claims that Baldoni repeatedly entered Lively's dressing room while she was undressed or breastfeeding. The article states that a journalist reviewed thousands of pages of evidence supporting such allegations. But according to Lars Harry and several online commentators, the article does not clearly present the evidence it references. This absence raises a question that Lars Harry believes journalists must address directly. If serious claims are made about someone's behavior, where is the supporting documentation? Without clear evidence being presented to readers, the allegations remain statements rather than verified facts. Lars Harry stresses that this does not automatically mean the accusations are false, but it does mean that responsible reporting should show how the conclusions were reached. As the discussion continues, Lars Harry reflects on conversations he previously had with individuals who supported Blake Lively's perspective. During those interviews, he says, several people told him that additional information would eventually emerge proving the allegations beyond doubt. At the time, Lars Harry remained open to that possibility. However, he now notes that many of those promised revelations never appeared publicly. That absence has created confusion even among some people who initially believed the accusations without question. Lars Harry makes it clear that he does not think the individuals he spoke with were deliberately spreading misinformation. Instead, he suspects they may have been repeating claims they heard from other sources who believed more evidence existed than actually did. Situations like that, he explains, are common during high-profile controversies, where rumors circulate quickly and become accepted as facts before anyone verifies them.
I don't think I relate to any of my characters. I've played a crack addict from Boston. I've played an Upper East Side princess.
The conversation then shifts to one of the strangest elements of the entire dispute, the appearance of fabricated human resources complaints. Lars Harry describes how documents claiming to represent workplace complaints were circulated among certain commentators and online creators. At first glance, the documents appeared to support the idea that Baldoni had behaved inappropriately behind the scenes. But as investigators examined them more closely, they discovered inconsistencies suggesting the complaints were not authentic. Lars Harry finds this detail remarkable because it represents the only piece of evidence in the entire controversy that has been clearly demonstrated to be false. Yet he believes it has not received nearly as much attention in mainstream coverage as it deserves. Instead, the focus remains primarily on allegations that have not been proven either true or false. Lars Harry clarifies that he does not blame content creators who initially shared the documents, because they were operating under the assumption that the complaints were genuine. When information appears credible and aligns with an ongoing narrative, it often spreads quickly through online discussion spaces. However, once it became clear that the documents were fabricated, Lars Harry believes journalists and commentators should have examined that development more closely. Fabricated evidence suggests that someone involved in the broader conversation may have attempted to manipulate public opinion, and that possibility deserves serious investigation. Moving back to the New York Times article itself, Lars Harry begins analyzing specific sections of the text. The headline asks what behavior crosses the line on a movie set, especially when filming scenes involving romance or physical intimacy. At first glance, the question seems reasonable. Film productions frequently include scenes where actors must portray affection or conflict, and the boundaries between acting and personal comfort can become complicated. But Lars Harry argues that the wording of the headline subtly frames the situation in a particular way. By asking what behavior crosses the line, the article implies that questionable conduct already occurred and that the only remaining debate is about how severe it was. That framing shapes how readers interpret the rest of the piece. Even before they encounter the details, the article then describes the slow dance scene that has become central to the legal dispute. According to Lars Harry, the article presents the moment as if it were ambiguous or suspicious, suggesting that Baldoni may have initiated an unscripted kiss. Yet Lars Harry emphasizes that the scene itself was written as part of a romantic montage depicting two characters falling in love. In other words, physical closeness was already built into the script. When actors perform such scenes, they often improvise small gestures to make the moment feel more authentic. That does not necessarily indicate personal interest between the performers. Lars Harry points out that critics who view the footage without considering the context of the script may interpret the interaction very differently from people who understand the filmmaking process. As the article continues, it describes the legal battle between Lively and Baldoni as a complex civil case involving allegations of harassment, retaliation, and defamation. Lars Harry notes that the article characterizes Baldoni supporters as defenders, while referring to Lively's allies simply as supporters. Though the difference may seem subtle, Lars Harry believes it creates an impression that Baldoni is automatically on the defensive while Lively represents the default position of credibility. Language choices like that, he argues, influence readers subconsciously even when the writer claims to present both sides fairly. Another major issue involves the way the article describes Baldoni's previous lawsuit against Lively. According to Lars Harry, the article briefly mentions that Baldoni's case was dismissed, which might lead readers to assume the claims were rejected entirely. However, Lars Harry explains that the dismissal was procedural rather than a judgment on the merits of the accusations. In legal disputes, cases are often dismissed because of technical reasons related to jurisdiction, filing procedures, or timing. That does not necessarily mean the underlying claims lack evidence. By omitting that context, Lars Harry believes the article creates a misleading impression of what actually happened in court. The discussion then turns to the role of intimacy coordinators in modern filmmaking. Over the past decade, especially after the #Me Too movement gained global attention, film productions have adopted stricter protocols for scenes involving physical contact. Actors typically review such scenes in advance, discuss boundaries with coordinators, and agree on specific actions before filming begins. The New York Times article references these protocols while discussing Lively's allegations. But Lars Harry points out that several reports indicate Lively herself declined to participate in early meetings with the intimacy coordinator assigned to the production. If that information is accurate, it complicates the narrative that Baldoni ignored established procedures. Lars Harry emphasizes that declining a meeting does not automatically invalidate someone's later concerns, but it does raise questions about how the protocols were actually applied during filming. Another intriguing detail involves reports that Lively improvised certain moments herself, including a kiss that was not originally scripted. Lars Harry explains that improvisation is common in filmmaking, especially when actors try to make emotional scenes feel natural. But if both performers occasionally improvised physical gestures, it becomes difficult to argue that one person alone was responsible for crossing boundaries. Lars Harry says this is precisely why clear communication on film sets is essential. Without explicit agreements about what actions are acceptable, misunderstandings can easily occur. As Lars Harry continues analyzing the article, he returns to a broader issue concerning media influence. He observes that the New York Times has enormous power to shape public perception simply by choosing which details to emphasize. A journalist can write two completely different articles about the same event depending on which facts receive the most attention. One version could portray Blake Lively as a victim of unacceptable behavior, while another could focus on Baldoni's claim that he was falsely accused in order to shift control of the film's production. Both narratives could technically reference real events, yet the overall impression they create would be dramatically different. This realization leads Lars Harry to reflect on how modern audiences consume news. In the age of social media, many people read headlines or short summaries rather than investigating the full context of complex stories. When a respected publication releases a dramatic headline, readers often assume the information has already been verified thoroughly. But Lars Harry believes the Baldoni-Lively controversy demonstrates why deeper examination is necessary. Each new piece of information changes the picture slightly, and the truth may lie somewhere between the competing narratives. As Part 1 draws toward its conclusion, Lars Harry emphasizes that he is not claiming to know exactly what happened behind the scenes of the film. Instead, his goal is to encourage listeners to examine evidence carefully and remain skeptical of simplified explanations. He believes the controversy illustrates a broader problem in modern media culture, where stories about celebrities and scandals spread quickly before all the facts are available. Once a narrative becomes popular, it can be extremely difficult to change public perception, even when new information appears. According to Lars Harry, the real significance of the latest New York Times article may not be the specific allegations it discusses, but the larger question it raises about journalism itself. When a publication that helped create the original narrative continues reinforcing that narrative despite contradictory evidence, readers must decide whether the reporting reflects objective investigation or unconscious bias. That question, Lars Harry suggests, will become even more important as the legal battle moves closer to trial and both sides prepare to present their arguments in court. He ends the first portion of the discussion by promising that there is still much more to analyze from the article and from the broader case surrounding the film. It ends with us. In the next part of the episode, Lars Harry plans to continue examining the remaining sections of the article, explore additional evidence that has surfaced online, and discuss how public relations strategies may be influencing the way the story unfolds in the media. As the discussion continues, Lars Harry returns to the New York Times article and explains that the deeper he looked into it, the more he felt the piece was trying to guide readers toward a very specific conclusion. According to him, the structure of the article seemed carefully arranged so that the most dramatic accusations were presented first, while the explanations or counter-arguments appeared later and received much less attention. Lars Harry tells his audience that this is a common technique in modern media. When readers encounter powerful claims early in a story, those claims tend to shape how they interpret everything that follows. Even if the article later includes a clarification or an opposing viewpoint, many people will already have formed an opinion based on the first impression. That is why Lars Harry believes responsible reporting should present the context immediately rather than waiting until the end of a paragraph or burying it in smaller sections of the text. He then focuses on a section of the article that describes the film It Ends With Us, the adaptation of Colleen Hoover's novel that brought Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni together professionally. The book itself deals with extremely sensitive subject matter, including a romantic relationship that eventually becomes abusive. Because of that storyline, the film naturally required scenes depicting intense emotional conflict and physical closeness between characters. Lars Harry explains that in such projects, the boundary between storytelling and real-life interactions can become complicated. Actors must portray affection, anger, vulnerability, and sometimes violence, all while maintaining a professional relationship off-camera. That is why Hollywood introduced intimacy coordinators and detailed protocols for handling sensitive scenes. These systems are supposed to protect performers while also allowing filmmakers to tell difficult stories. However, Lars Harry points out that the article frames Lively's experience in a way that blurs the line between the fictional narrative of the movie and the alleged events behind the scenes. The text describes how Lively portrayed a woman suffering abuse within the story, and then it moves directly into statements suggesting that the environment during filming became hostile as well. Lars Harry argues that this type of wording can subtly influence readers by merging two different realities. The audience may begin to feel as though the fictional violence depicted in the film somehow reflects real events that occurred during production. Whether that impression is intentional or accidental, Lars Harry believes it makes the article less neutral than it claims to be. Another part of the article describes an incident involving Jamie Heath, an executive associated with Baldoni's production company. According to the allegations, Heath allegedly showed Lively a video he claimed was footage of his wife giving birth. The article presents the moment as if it were shocking or inappropriate, but Lars Harry explains that Heath later offered a completely different description of what happened. Heath reportedly said the video actually showed his wife after the birth had already occurred and that the reason for showing it was related to planning a scene in the movie that involved childbirth imagery. Lars Harry acknowledges that even if Heath's explanation is accurate, the situation could still have felt awkward or uncomfortable for Lively. But he emphasizes that awkwardness does not automatically mean malicious intent. Lars Harry also mentions that testimony from various witnesses appears to conflict with each other regarding this particular moment. Some people recall Lively wearing certain clothing, while others remember the situation differently. Some say Heath knocked before entering the room, while others are uncertain. These inconsistencies illustrate how difficult it can be to reconstruct events after the fact, especially when multiple people interpret the same situation in different ways. Lars Harry believes that journalism should highlight such uncertainties instead of presenting them as settled facts. Continuing through the article, Lars Harry notes that Baldoni's legal team argued many of the interactions described by Lively could simply have been misunderstandings rather than intentional harassment. According to their argument, once Lively raised concerns about certain moments, the production team addressed them and no further complaints were filed at the time. Lars Harry stresses that this does not necessarily prove Baldoni's innocence, but it does show that the situation may have been more complicated than the original narrative suggested. The article then shifts toward discussing broader cultural changes in Hollywood since the #Me Too movement. Lars Harry explains that the movement dramatically changed how film productions handle issues of consent and workplace behavior. Practices that might once have been accepted without question are now examined much more carefully. While Lars Harry believes these changes have been important and necessary, he also warns that the new environment can sometimes lead to situations where ordinary professional disagreements become framed as major ethical violations. The challenge, he says, is finding a balance between protecting individuals from real abuse and avoiding the assumption that every uncomfortable moment is evidence of wrongdoing. Another interesting detail Lars Harry points out involves actress Jenny Slate, who appeared in the film alongside Lively and Baldoni. According to the article, Slate testified that Baldoni once made a comment describing her outfit as sexy. The article implies that this remark contributed to the overall pattern of behavior being examined in the case. But Lars Harry notes that Slate herself reportedly stated the matter was resolved quickly and that she did not believe it justified legal action. In fact, according to some reports, Slate expressed that she considered the situation relatively minor. Lars Harry argues that presenting the comment as part of a larger harassment narrative without fully explaining Slate's own perspective can mislead readers about the seriousness of the event. As Lars Harry continues his analysis, he arrives at a passage in the article discussing the legal standard for workplace harassment. Experts cited in the piece explain that uncomfortable experiences alone do not necessarily meet the threshold required for a successful harassment claim. In legal terms, the behavior must be severe or pervasive enough to create a hostile working environment. Lars Harry pauses here and tells his listeners that this sentence may reveal the true purpose of the article. In his view, the piece appears to be preparing the public for the possibility that Lively's case might struggle to meet that legal standard in court. If the lawsuit ultimately fails, Lars Harry believes the article could function as a kind of public relations buffer. By discussing the complexity of harassment law and the difficulty of proving certain claims, the story may encourage readers to view a potential legal loss not as evidence that Lively's accusations were false but simply as a reflection of how challenging such cases are to win. Lars Harry admits this interpretation is speculative, but he finds the timing of the article interesting given how long the controversy has been developing. At this point in the discussion, Lars Harry raises a broader question about the relationship between celebrities and major media organizations. Do journalists actively coordinate with public relations teams to shape narratives, or are they simply drawn to stories that generate attention and controversy? Lars Harry says he personally believes the second explanation is more likely. Reporters often pursue stories they believe will attract readers, and once they become invested in a particular narrative, they may subconsciously resist information that contradicts it. That does not necessarily mean they are acting maliciously, but it can still lead to incomplete reporting. Lars Harry then shifts to a lighter moment in the conversation, mentioning that the article briefly referenced online commentators who have been analyzing the case. To his surprise, one of those references included a link to a YouTube video from his own channel. However, the article did not mention him by name, instead referring only to podcasters discussing emails and text messages connected to Baldoni's public relations strategy. Lars Harry laughs about the situation but also points out how strange it feels to be cited indirectly by a major publication without receiving proper credit. He decides to examine the analytics for the video in question and notices something interesting. Despite the New York Times linking to the video, there was no noticeable spike in views afterward. Normally, when a large news outlet directs traffic to a smaller platform, the creator sees at least a temporary increase in engagement. But in this case, the numbers remained steady. Lars Harry interprets this as evidence that the influence of traditional media may not be as powerful as it once was, at least when it comes to driving audiences toward independent online content. The conversation briefly pauses as Lars Harry reads promotional messages from sponsors associated with the Coravanta podcast. He explains that modern creators often rely on partnerships with companies offering services like website builders or clothing brands to support their work. After acknowledging the sponsors and encouraging listeners to explore their products, Lars Harry quickly returns to the main topic of the episode. Once the analysis resumes, he reiterates that the Baldoni-Lively dispute has grown far beyond a simple disagreement between two actors. It now involves lawyers, production companies, journalists, online commentators, and millions of people following the story across social media. Each new piece of information is dissected by audiences who attempt to determine which side is telling the truth. Lars Harry believes this intense scrutiny reflects a broader cultural fascination with celebrity conflicts. When famous individuals become involved in legal battles, the public often treats the situation almost like a long-running drama series. Before wrapping up the episode, Lars Harry also discusses a smaller but intriguing subplot connected to the case. A public relations professional named Jennifer Abel recently posted comments on social media that reignited questions about internal disputes among people who once worked on the project. According to Lars Harry, the details involve disagreements over access to phone data and communications that might contain relevant information. Legal experts have noted that when employees use company devices, determining who owns the data can become complicated. If someone hands over a phone without securing personal copies of their messages first, they may later find themselves unable to access information that could defend them. Lars Harry explains that situations like this highlight how messy high-profile legal conflicts can become. The story no longer revolves solely around Baldoni and Lively, it now includes assistants, lawyers, executives, and consultants whose roles intersect in unexpected ways. Each person involved has their own perspective and their own version of events, which makes the truth even harder to establish. As the episode approaches its conclusion, Lars Harry reflects on the broader lesson he believes listeners should take from the controversy. In an era where headlines travel faster than detailed reporting, people must learn to evaluate information carefully. Even respected publications can make mistakes or present incomplete narratives. That does not mean every article is intentionally misleading, but it does mean readers should remain curious and skeptical rather than accepting every claim at face value. He emphasizes that he does not expect his audience to agree with all of his interpretations. In fact, he encourages listeners to examine the evidence themselves and form their own conclusions. The internet contains an enormous amount of information about the case, including court documents, video footage, interviews, and commentary from multiple perspectives. By exploring those sources directly, individuals can develop a more balanced understanding of what might have happened. Finally, Lars Harry thanks his listeners for spending time with him during this extended bonus discussion of the Coravanta podcast. He promises to continue following developments in the Baldoni lively legal battle as the court proceedings move closer to trial. Whether the case ends in settlement, dismissal, or a full courtroom showdown, Lars Harry believes it will remain one of the most closely watched entertainment industry disputes in recent memory. With that, he signs off for the night, reminding everyone to stay curious, question narratives, and remember that complicated stories rarely have simple answers.